I'm walking along the Ohio River in Marietta, Ohio, which was founded on April 7th, 1788, and is the oldest permanent settlement in the Northwest Territory. Marietta was largely founded by veterans of the American Revolutionary War, who were also members of the Ohio Company of Associates. And just walking around this city, seeing all the interpretive signs and historic markers, you can really tell that Marietta boasts so much history. And today we'll be visiting perhaps its most fascinating historic site, Mound Cemetery. Now, Mound Cemetery is particularly interesting because it is believed to be the final resting place of more officers of the American Revolution than any other cemetery in the country. I'm now at Marietta's Mound Cemetery, and let me tell you, especially with the snowfall and just the neighborhood that this cemetery is in, this looks like a scene from a movie. You have these brick streets, snow all over the branches and just kind of lightly falling, and there's really no wind, which is really nice. But I do think with the amount of snow on the ground, it might be a little difficult to find some of the graves, but we will do our best. Go ahead and check out some of these tablets here on the front. Erected by the Marietta chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution, as a memorial to the revolutionary soldiers buried in Marietta and to honor the heroic men and women who faced the wilderness with courage and hope to create the great Northwest. As I walk around, I just want to give a little bit of the history of Marietta's Mound Cemetery. So it was established in 1801, and the town decided that they wanted to create a burial ground around the base of an ancient burial mound, and that was really to preserve it, and we're actually walking up towards it now. And this Native American burial mound is believed to date from between 100 BC and 500 AD, and it's actually part of a larger complex of mounds that is known as the Marietta earthworks. So they established this cemetery, again in 1801 around the base of it, which really did, of course, preserve the mound and also created a very unique and beautiful cemetery for us to enjoy today. And here is an extremely helpful sign for Mound Cemetery. The origin and disappearance of the prehistoric mound builders has long been shrouded in mystery. Conus is the burial place of chieftains. The mounds and earthworks were constructed between 800 BC and 700 AD. These early inhabitants were the first farmers and artisans in the Ohio Valley, and Marietta was the site of the mound builders' city. Marietta, the first permanent white settlement in the Northwest Territory, was founded on April 7, 1788, under the leadership of General Rufus Putnam for the Ohio Company of Associates. Many of the pioneers were officers and soldiers of the American Revolution who received land grants for military services. It is most fitting that many of the first settlers were buried here beside the ancient inhabitants. And this map is awesome. We can see the mound here at the center of the cemetery, and it lists all of these Revolutionary War soldiers buried here and gives a general location of them. And I do recall reading there are 37 known to be buried here, and of those 37, 6 of them have unknown graves. And unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to visit all of these sites today, but we'll visit a few and generally just pay our respects to these veterans that are laid to rest here at Mound Cemetery. I'm going to start my visit here at Mound Cemetery off to the side where Commodore Abraham Whipple is buried. Not only because I wanted to visit his gravesite, but there are also a number of Patriots all buried within this general area. And like I said, there are 37 known Revolutionary soldiers buried here, so we're not going to be able to visit them all, but I'm going to try and see as many of them as I can. And what's really helpful, as you'll see here at Commodore Whipple, and we'll also see here at Colonel Ebenzer Sproat, they have these Sons of the American Revolution markers at each of their grave, which makes it a little bit easier to identify them as you're walking around. But we'll start here with Commodore Whipple. So born in 1733 near Providence, Rhode Island, Commodore Abraham Whipple, like many of the colonists in Rhode Island, became involved in the maritime trade. And when the American Revolution came up, he had already been involved in a lot of the Patriot actions in the years leading up to the war. So he served as a naval officer throughout the American Revolutionary War, and he commanded ships for the Continental Navy, protecting American commerce and capturing numerous British vessels. And of course, after the war, he moved out here to Ohio, where he helped survey and settle lands in the Northwest Territory. And many remember him as a bold and capable seaman who also helped lay the foundation for the United States Navy. And one of those sides is a little difficult to read, but over here, the inscription is very clear. Sacred to the memory of Commodore Abraham Whipple, whose naval skill and courage will ever remain the pride and boast of his country. In the Revolution, he was the first on the seas to hurl defiance at proud Britain, gallantly leading the way to wrest from the mistress of the ocean her scepter, and there to wave the star-spangled banner. He also conducted to the sea the first square-rigged vessel built on the Ohio, opening to commerce resources beyond calculation. That is awesome. What a great write-up and description of a man who served his nation in its earliest hour and also helped establish Marietta and did a lot of work here on the Ohio River as well, so he never got far from his maritime roots. And right next to him, as I touched on earlier, is the final resting place of Colonel Ebenzer Sproat, another patriot who was born in 1752 and died in 1805. And we see there on his headstone, Colonel Ebenzer Sproat of the Army of the Revolution. And just off to the side here, we have a pretty large, newer marker, and this is dedicated to two patriots. We can see both of the Sons of the American Revolution markers there. The first one is General Benjamin Tupper of the Army of the American Revolution. It says he was born at Sharon, Massachusetts, 1738, and died in 1792. And also here off to the right is the grave of Major Anselm Tupper of the Army of the Revolution, born at Easton, Massachusetts, 1763, and died in 1808. And it lists for Major Tupper, immigrated to Marietta, 1788, where he served as commander of the stockade fort. Not far is the grave of Colonel William Stacy, who also served in the American Revolution, came as part of that first wave of pioneers to Marietta in 1788, and it reads here that he was proprietor in Ohio Company, foreman of First Grand Jury in Ohio. He died in 1802, and this marker here was erected by his descendants in 1928. Here we see Colonel William Stacy. And there really is no wind today, which is making this a lot more pleasant to walk around than I expected. And one thing that I hear is sort of a rite of passage when visiting Marietta is to climb the steps of the mound here at the center of the cemetery. So we're going to go ahead and go up there now before we see some of the other graves and take in some of the views. Okay, I'm here up at the top of the mound, and the views are every bit as spectacular as I hoped. They actually also have a couple benches up here where you can come and relax, which is nice, though I wouldn't recommend leaning back. It's a nice little fall all the way down. But there is a marker here up at the top at the center that reads, "Beneath this stone is a time capsule placed here in commemoration of the bicentennial celebration of the United States of America by the Marietta Junior Bicentennial Commission, July 3rd, 1976, and this isn't to be opened until July 4th, 2076. But you can really get a great view of the entire cemetery, and I'm actually glad I'm here in the winter because the trees are bare and I can see the entire cemetery from up here, which is a really neat vantage point. And to be standing on top of an ancient mound that dates back at least 1,500 to 2,000 years is really remarkable. And I also find it really awesome that the founders of the town determined that the best way to preserve this piece of historic history was to build their own cemetery around the base of it. So I'm glad they did that, because it not only preserved the history that was already here, but it also, like I said, really created quite a unique and beautiful cemetery. But we're going to go ahead and head back down the stairs and check out some more graves of our Revolutionary War patriots. Now I'm back here along the fence, and this marker, though newer, is in memory of Colonel Robert Taylor, who was born in 1748 and died on September 30th, 1801 at 65 years old. And I mentioned that this was a newer marker because Colonel Taylor was actually the very first internment here at the Mound Cemetery when it was established in 1801. I imagine his original marker has long since been gone, but here we see Colonel Robert Taylor, another patriot of the American Revolution, again, who was the first internment here at Mound Cemetery. And he's actually buried by a couple other veterans, not necessarily of the American Revolution, but some of the American Civil War, as we see here. And also some veterans of the War of 1812. So the Mound Cemetery is just the final resting place for so many veterans that served the United States over the years. Here is another one of the veterans buried here, Major Ezra Putnam from Massachusetts, who served in the 19th Regiment Continental Troops. Born in June of 1729, died March of 1811. And that name, Putnam, is pretty famous in American history. Whether you're talking about Israel Putnam or this man right here, General Rufus Putnam, who is one of the founders of the city of Marietta and one of the more prominent Revolutionary soldiers to be buried here at Mound Cemetery. Rufus Putnam was born in 1738, and he was an American military officer who served not only in the American Revolution, but had also served in the French and Indian War, as did many of these older veterans. And he was an original organizer of the Ohio Company of Associates, and as mentioned, he was really one of the founders of Marietta when he came out here. And he lived all the way until 1824, so he really got to see this city grow here along the Ohio River, and was instrumental again in establishing that and a lot of the trade and colonization here in this area. And again, he died in 1824 here in Marietta and is buried right here. I'm going to go ahead and brush off this marker. Kind of see. I should have brought a towel with me, but also wasn't expecting this much snow. All right, this marker dedicated to Rufus Putnam, first Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons of Ohio, 1808. So there you go, the final resting place of one of the town's founders and a veteran of the American Revolution, General Rufus Putnam. When I said you could spend an entire day walking around here, I really wasn't kidding. I am just so mesmerized by some of these headstones and reading the names and some of the descriptions of these individuals and what they did in their life. And like I said, today I'm really focusing on veterans of the American Revolution, but there are veterans of the American Civil War laid to rest here all over the place, as well as the War of 1812. So I would definitely give yourself probably a few hours. I wouldn't necessarily recommend coming on a day after it snowed a few inches, because it's kind of hard to see some of this. But again, thankfully, due to these SAR markers here, we can see another veteran of the American Revolution. This is Andrew McAllister, born 1745, died in 1816. It says that he served as a private in the American Revolutionary War. I believe off to this side there are a few more Revolutionary War veterans, and then I'm actually going to loop back around the mound to see a few more before I take off. Here we see one by the tree. This is the final resting place of Isaac Berry, born 1762, died 1863. That would have him living to 101, essentially, which is really remarkable, especially at that time. Here, this grouping of flags and Sons of the American Revolution markers is in memory of all of the soldiers of the American Revolution that are buried in Washington County, Ohio, whose graves are unknown. And this is a very beautiful tribute to these soldiers. And this was erected by the Marietta chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution in 1927. So what's neat is all these markers actually have the names of these veterans. Like here we see Caleb Barstow, died 1823. And we know the names of these men, but of course, as it mentions, we don't know the actual or exact burial location. So this is a very fitting tribute to these veterans here, especially as we walk around and see the final resting place of many other veterans of the American Revolution that are laid to rest here. Actually, and here we go. Captain, Massachusetts Militia, born October 1742, died September 1821. And I believe I see another one right off to the side here. This one's for Nathaniel Dodge, who died in 1838 here in Marietta. And that is definitely the original headstone for Nathaniel Dodge. And just with the backdrop of that mound here at the center, you really got to come see this for yourself. It's really hard to describe in words. Marietta's Mound Cemetery really is remarkable. To be able to come here and visit a place that has more officers of the American Revolution buried than anywhere else in the country, to include New England or the East Coast or any of the 13 original colonies, is just astounding. And this cemetery is just really a time capsule of that history. Not just due to the mound here at the center, which is some prehistoric history, but also thinking about all of those veterans of the American Revolution, the War of 1812, the American Civil War, and beyond that are laid to rest here. It's a nice place to be able to walk around, pay your respects. And I don't know, even on a day like today where it's nice and snowy, it actually adds to the experience a little bit. But that's going to be it for this one. Now it's on to the next journey. Thank you.